Well, hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's Roundtable. So great to see you all. Today, we're going to talk about courage. And so I know as coaches, we have an opportunity to work with people in different ways as they need courage. So let's see. We'll do a quick review here. I've done some research, which we share in the show notes below. But I thought a male and a female lion here might represent courage for us. So in this slide here, it's representative of some of the ideas from the research we did. And in my mind, these were two entrepreneurs coming out of a meeting because they pitched their new business or something. You know, courage shows up in different ways. To assess your courage or get, your courage within. One of the recommendations in the research printed in Psychology Today was they did a study where they asked people to remember a time that they had a moment of courage, and they had to write about it for 5 minutes. And then they put them through various tasks. And the people in this part of the study where they just put them through the tasks without remembering a time they were courageous, the people who had remembered their courage performed the tasks better and with more ease. So their recommendation is if you find yourself at a place where you think you might have to call on your courage, remember a time where you already did that successfully, and that will prime you for what's about to come that you need your courage for. There was another article about a woman who was emphasizing, a psychologist, sometimes when you experience fear, it's because you actually are at risk. And you should listen to the fear and let it inform you to run. So her example was a woman who was in her apartment building, and she started running into someone new who'd moved in. And every time she ran into him in the lobby where you get the mail, the hairs on her neck stood up, and she felt like she was prey. And she decided to never engage with this person and moved out of the building. So she didn't access her courage. She let her fear access her survival. It turns out he'd recently been released from prison for sexual assault offenses. So when Brene Brown talks about using courage, she says, are you hesitating, like you're not sure? Or actually, do you feel that need to run, like this is a survival thing? And internally, as we access our courage, learning ourselves and answering that question, is this because I'm uncomfortable, or because I'm worried about the consequences or the outcome, or do I actually feel legit fear to my physical self and I need to get out of here? As we look at the philosophers, they talk about cultivating courage as a virtue. So we could talk about that. Another research report that I share in the notes is to examine your thinking. So if you have a lot of thoughts in your head that are just negative self-doubts, I'm not sure I can do this, I probably will fail at it, to examine what is your thinking doing, and is it trying to derail you because you're not in your comfort zone? You can realign your thinking to, well, what if it does work out? What if I try it and I don't fail? I actually make it work. The example they share is a woman executive who kept getting offers to come to a company she really liked, but she was afraid to leave the stability of the job she was in. And after a year, she finally accepted their offer, and then she killed it at the new company. She loved the people she worked with. She expanded and blossomed in the work she was doing. That hesitation, that fear was sort of just negative limiting beliefs. And then she was kicking herself for not making the jump sooner. So examine your thinking. Some people use a worst case scenario in order to have them understand, well, what's the worst thing that could happen? If I'm trying to screw up my courage to do something, what if it doesn't work out? What is the worst case? If I can live with that, then maybe I, can go ahead and take the risk. And then lastly, they talk about raising children to develop the capacity to confront challenges, that they find their own well of courage because they will face challenges in life. And having the capacity to confront challenges is going to be important as they grow up and become adults. Okay, now we go to our memes. I was thinking about courage and I found a picture of a skateboarder because I remember I was the fearful mom who had Brian skateboarding over curbs and dishes and thinking about broken bones and so on. So sometimes courage is just tackling something like BMX bike racing or horseback riding or skateboarding. Okay, so 4 quick memes. To the left, we have a picture in a boardroom of a giant comfort zone, and then a tiny little dot over here that says magic. Like to go find the magic, you might have to leave the big comfort zone. There's another meme here, and they've crossed out the words, you are not your thoughts, and then underneath it says, you are the observer behind them. So if your negative thinking is limiting your ability to go out of your comfort zone, you might reimagine your thinking. Okay, this Anais Nin quote, life shrinks or expands in proportion to one's courage. And then our very last meme here is a bird singing, happiness is a form of courage. So happiness works too. Okay. And done with our slides. So I hope I've given you guys some food for thought as we discuss courage today. Brian, tell us where you are.
Yeah, I'm in Vietnam,
What you
co-founder of Alike Designs. So
Great.
yeah, courage. I like that meme where it said happiness takes courage, because I think we tend to think of courage as a way to deal with negative things,
Mhm.
but you can also have courage to love, or courage to be happy, or courage to be kind, So that's good. Yeah, in general, what I say about courage is it's a starting point. It enables positive things to come into your life. So David Hawkins was big on talking about that. Basically, like, how can you get something new into your life that's more positive than what you have now? It takes some level of courage to get started, some level of open-mindedness, some level of motivation, right? Those things are prerequisites to just enable some kind of new positive thing to come in. So to always keep those qualities like on hand, ready to go, that means you're always ready to have something new and positive come in when it's time for that. There's a lot of different kinds of courage. We don't really talk about this in our society that much. Um, but like there's intellectual courage. So which would be courage to think different, or courage to make different arguments. Like in a scientific community or in academia, there tends to be like an accepted narrative. If you want to argue for something that's a little bit outside that, that takes courage. But that's what pushes the boundaries of people's thinking. Like that's where breakthroughs come from, right?
Mhm.
Courage opens up the doors to all those new possibilities. Um, yeah, like social courage. Like if you want to start behaving differently in your peer group, that takes some courage. And you're trying to shift the dynamic.
Mhm.
You know, I think it's good when people do these things. I think a lot of people choose not to, but basically, anytime someone steps up and has courage, that's where things are going to develop. Um, and there's a good chance it can develop in a positive direction if you feel really called to go in that direction. Let's see. You could look at like inner courage. Like you could speak about this in relation to meditation. In other words, how deep are you willing to look within yourself? How deep are you willing to go? How much courage do you have to see what's in there?
Mhm.
Like, how much courage do you have to transform your consciousness, the way you're experiencing those moments in meditation. That's a certain level of inner courage. Could be courage like something to, take on a new career. Um, you know, learn new skills. Are you confident enough in yourself to learn new skills, to be able to do well in a new industry?
Mhm.
So I think all these things, if you can at least embrace it initially, at least gives you the potential to go down those roads. So I think it's really helpful for that. Also, I think courage, sometimes people say like self-improvement can be really awkward. And I think that's true. Um, you almost have to like, if you're gonna have the courage to start becoming different, you have to be willing to like either embrace that awkwardness, either that you feel or that other people feel towards you, because they're not used to seeing you be like this. You have to be able to embrace that or smooth that out somehow. So if you have some social skills around that really helps. Um, yeah, because sometimes other people aren't comfortable with you changing.
Mhm.
And so that's going to create resistance on their part. And I've felt that feeling before. Like I felt the pressure to not change from other people.
Mhm.
So in my mind, it kind of felt like other people don't want to let me change.
Mhm.
Like they don't want to allow this.
Mhm.
And I felt that. But it's their changes that I wanted to make.
Mhm.
So then you have to smooth it out or just let relationships kind of fizzle out or just, find whatever best way there is to handle that. Sometimes it's people's egos too that sort of reject what you're trying to do with that, with a certain change you're trying to make. Another thing is sometimes it's courage to just continue. So what if you try 5 things and they don't work? Do you have the courage to keep going? What if you try 10 things and they don't work? Do you have the courage to try 10 more? Right? So just the courage to continue to, if you really believe in what you're doing, having the courage to keep going, trying new things, pursuing new angles, and keep pushing it to, the goal that you want to end up achieving. I think with 2020 and the lockdowns and the jabs and everything, I think that really spoke a lot to, from my perspective, the lack of courage in our society. And I think it was a very good example of the consequences of that. Very few people wanted to really like publicly speak out against a lot that was happening there, either lockdowns or things being mandated, masks, social distancing, all this kind of stuff. And I do think that was kind of a litmus test for the courage of our society. I don't think we did very well um, on that. But that really shows you like the need for courage when things like this are presented to a
Mhm.
society. Like there needs to be people who step up and say no.
Mhm.
Like we're not doing that. And people who either kind of withdraw out of some of the societal rules and kind of go their own way, or at least publicly put up some kind of at least social resistance. Um, who knows? That could happen again, right? You could have a repeat. There could be a new pandemic and a new thing. Are we going to stand up this time?
Mhm.
I mean, so that's where you have the need for courage. Um, and I think courage is essential for humanity building a better world, a new earth. And I think there's going to need to be courage in every area, like including science. I think a lot of our science is going to have to be redone. Um, maybe religions are going to have to be redone. Philosophies are going to have to be redone. Cultures are going to have to be redone. Like over time, maybe over 10, 20, 30 years, who knows how long the time frame is. But there's going to have to be a courage to unlearn and relearn,
Mhm.
like Jonathan talks about. Um, we have to imagine new types of communities, which is one of the things we're trying to do here at ALD. New ways that people can relate to each other in a positive manner. Um, I think as humanity goes through a lot of these changes. So, yeah, basically that's how I would get started off on this topic here
Thank you so much,
of
Brian.
courage.
I appreciate that. Well, Angela, do you have some thoughts on courage? I know we were chatting in a work chat yesterday, and you had some very interesting takes on when people need courage. So, yeah, let people know where you are and introduce yourself and tell us your thoughts about
I live in Central Texas, United States. That's where I am. All right.
courage.
Where spring is springing. Um, and I'm your neighbor, Myrna.
Yes.
So what I guess I like the meme that you have that you are not your thoughts, you're the observer, having them. And I really like bringing that up because we are really, if we're talking about the higher consciousness level and the soul level, courage and fear is a non-issue. And that's why that comment, that meme is so poignant and resonates so dearly with us because we know at some level this is a non-conversation. However, we are talking about the physical and the mental or psychological, which are fairly intertwined. And we do have, of course, fear at that level, at the egoic and the physical body level, right? The body wants to preserve itself, the ego wants to preserve itself, and we live in a duality situation, complementary opposites, courage, fear, courage. One goes with the other, right? You want fries with that? So I think about physical courage, and of course that's when I think about courage. Funny thing when you said about courage, the very first thing that popped in my head days ago when I knew this was going to be our topic was the silly song in The Wizard of Oz with the lion
Cowardly
has
Lion.
no courage, and he's singing about the things that are courage. Which, if you go look at the lyrics of that song, they are nonsensical. What makes the Hottentot so hot? What puts the ape in apricot? Courage, they say. Okay, so they're really nonsensical things. So I think it's kind of fun if you look at courage from the point of view of not being so intense about it, but really kind of let's have fun with it a little bit. But let's talk about physical courage real quickly. I was meditating this morning, and what came to me was the imagery of a person who wants to run into a burning building to save a child from the fire. Okay. So if you're a firefighter and you're doing this, what that is courage, obviously, but you have more courage to do this, not just because you have the desire to do it, but because you also have knowledge. You understand how the fire may behave. You understand about wearing safety equipment and how far your safety equipment may extend. You understand about the team and who's got what role, who's holding the hose and who's,
Holding
messing
the
with the ladder
ladder.
and going to the fire. So you have knowledge. You equip yourself with knowledge to deal with this physical danger. Just like if you were going to climb up a mountain, you would understand about pitons or pitons or whatever they're called, and ropes and the equipment that you need to have. Scuba diving. When I learned scuba diving, I was fearful of scuba diving, and what gave me courage was the knowledge of how to breathe with the equipment and to understand how it was going to work and how to get yourself out of danger if you're in danger to avoid nitrogen,
Poisoning.
problems, poisoning and so forth. So courage can come from a physical perspective, from knowledge, and of course, I think it can come from this desires. But when we talk about mental courage or psychological courage, and to address what you were talking about, Brian, about when the pandemic occurred, and many people were acting out of a sense of preservation, self-preservation. If they lost their job, how would they support themselves? How could they eat? So some of them were doing things that they were weighing the situation. I think I need to do this, even though I would like to speak out, but these are this is the consequences. I have a family, I've got to support my family, so I need to do the thing, even if I don't agree with the thing, so that I can actually keep my job or be able to do the thing. So I get that and I understand that. So to me, sometimes the courage is not, I'm doing it just because I'm blindly saying, like, I'm blindly following, but sometimes it's the choice. It takes a courageous choice to do the thing that is preserving your commitments, right? So it's a complicated, very complicated concept, the whole it's very complicated to me. And I feel like when, back in the day, I had a manager that once told me about what she called the pain and compensation scale. She's a mentor of mine. And she said, people, because why do you want courage? Courage is to change the situation, right? There's a person who's in that building and I want to change the situation. I want to bring them out of the building, right? Or I am fearful of heights and I want to conquer my fear because I want to go on this fabulous vacation in which I may have to be in a high place, and to see a view on the top of a mountain. And I don't want to have fear. Whatever the drive is, the motivation you have, the desire for overcoming that, there's a change. You're trying to transform or transition from one mental state to another mental state, right? So what she said was with this pain and compensation scale is that what happens is people have um, a desire they'll stay stuck until they have a desire. The compensation for what makes them stuck is no longer compensating them at that level. So to put it more succinctly, I would say it's when the desire for or the compensation for taking action, it outweighs the desire and the compensation to stay stuck and to remain where you are. So to me, it's about this, do I want it bad enough? And I might not be ready for it. And an example from a career perspective, I remember working with an individual early on, which was very insightful to me actually, as I later analyzed it and realized, I really don't want to do this kind of work per se, because I like seeing my clients get results. And this is an individual that I met with session after session, and she wanted to make a career change. She wanted to go from being an administrative professional working in the civil engineering firm, where the only way she could move up in her career was to become an engineer. And she had no calling to become an engineer. So she knew in order to become an office manager or have a managerial type of role, she needed to leave the civil engineering firm. But what was keeping her stuck after session of these are all the things to do, you know what to do, now take action, and not having the courage to take the action, so to speak. It wasn't courage. It was the familial bonds that she felt with her colleagues. And the fact is that she had less pain about her desire for career change than she had that she would feel if she left these colleagues who felt like a family to her. So you understand what I mean about this pain and compensation. The compensation wasn't strong enough for her to want to take that shift.
It
And
wasn't
she
worth
was
it.
aware of it, right? And until she could find that if within herself, the desire that was strong enough, that was when she could make that move. And it wasn't while she was working with me. It was late years later after working with other coaches and finally getting there. So the only other thought that I have to this is courage is a bold word. To me, it evokes this sense of being brave and intense, and it just has this. I don't know, words are important to me. They always have been, and they have a hold energy, right? And to me, the word courage is just, some people just don't resonate with having courage. Maybe they want to, maybe they like the idea of it, but they just don't believe in themselves enough to feel that they are courageous. That word is just so big. They feel like it's heroic. You have to be heroic to be courageous, right? So what I would say is instead of striving for courageousness and courage, think of it this way: strive for commitment. Commitment is something you can maybe get your head wrapped around better, your mind, your small mind, and its fears. Perhaps the commitment and the desire, the vision of what you see yourself in the future doing, right? Being on that mountain, seeing the view, and what you might want to strive for, right? And not thinking of it as I've got to be courageous. Instead, I just need to be committed to my vision. I need to be committed to this desire. So small steps. I think taking small steps towards something can get you there. Sure, you might be able to boom, throw off the shackles and do it boldly and just run off to Vietnam and start up your life again, right? In a new place like Brian has done. Or you might go, well, I think I might take a vacation to Vietnam and see if I like it. And maybe I'll go back and like stay there for a little longer and see if I can make some relationships and friends. This is the same thing like with a career change or lots of different types of changes you might want to have. So I just say, take small steps if you have to. If courage is too big of a concept or the word just doesn't resonate with you, think about it from a level of commitment to what you desire. And really look at yourself and say, is the pain of staying where I am stronger than the desire I have or what I feel like would be compensatory for me when I make that change?
Mhm.
Those are the thoughts that I had about it because we are talking about fear and the small self, the small s self, having all of this baggage and hangups and so forth. And the small self is just not going to throw all that away. It just isn't. There is no such thing as fearless for the ego. It just isn't. That's what ego is.
Mhm.
It's a big pile of baggage of fear based on whatever our experiences are,
Mhm.
the traumas we've had, the fears that others have piled on us, and that we've just accepted those patterns of fear, whatever. So to overcome that sometimes takes a little bit of step at a little bit of step, a little bit of step, so that you can become more the observer
Mhm.
noticing your life than you are the fear and the thoughts that are living your life.
Mhm.
So I'll leave on that profound thought. That's my.
That's really wonderful. In some of the research I did, and then we'll turn to Maddie, they talked about thrill seekers, and they call them T personalities, the T for thrill, and that biologically, some people that are thrill seekers don't have as many dopamine receptors in their brain. They actually elevate risk so they can really feel something. And so, I mean, biologically, we're not all identical. Our life experiences are not all identical. And so I love the small acts of courage to see if you can. Today I'm going to speak up in the meeting. I mean, I had a client who was just mortified to talk in meetings. And I said, well, just ask one question, see what happens. And eventually she had lunch with the CEO. I mean, we climbed a ladder with small acts of courage. And he was like, where you been? You have great ideas. Why am I not hearing them in the meetings? And she just said, thank you, rather than it's taken me 3 months to build the courage to
It
do
would be great if we had leaders that acknowledge that people might have a voice and then try to work ways to give them their voice. But
it.
unfortunately, we don't always have wise leaders at the helm, giving us those opportunities. And so, as the individual who wants to propel yourself forward, you must take the stand. You must
Yes.
take the steps yourself. You can't leave it in their hands, per se. It's so true.
Learning
That's
the kind of person that you are. Maybe you're a thrill seeker, maybe you're not. Maybe you feel like you're not brave, but you might try small steps or small acts of courage. And I think you're right that there is sometimes a catalyst and sometimes it's pain. Other times it's a catalyst of reward. I'm going to make these sacrifices because I'm going for the gold medal or because I want to hit more home runs than anybody else has ever hit in the school. There could be a reward mechanism that you're chasing and you're developing courage for that. So if you know yourself and then can push past your own limitations in the way that's right for
Yeah, but you
you.
know something, Myrna, I'm going to push back on that a little bit. Where do we get the achievement desire to have a reward? A lot of times that does come from fear of failure and fear of being judged by perhaps a parent figure who, if you didn't get the A or you didn't get the gold star or you didn't get the trophy. So
Mhm.
sometimes it isn't, I'm just saying, I'm being honest about human beings' egos, which is usually driven by I don't want things to change. And unless it's painful, like you had that meme with the comfort zone, where you know what I'm saying? It's like, what gets you out of your comfort zone? You get laid off from your job or fired from your job. Or there's someone who's abusing you there and you just can't stand it anymore because there's so much pain,
Mhm.
right? You
Mhm.
might hate this job. You might not really love this job,
Mhm.
but you're getting good money.
Mhm.
They call it the golden handcuffs,
Mhm.
right? Where you get a lot of money to do this crappy job
Mhm.
and you're like, oh, I can't leave even though I don't like this job. it's hurting my heart, literally giving me heartburn or high blood pressure. I mean, I've known people who've hated their job, stayed with it because they had this idea that, well, if I can just hang in there for 5 more years, I'll retire. Doesn't matter how I'm damaging,
I've heard
physically
that too.
damaging my
Can you do
heart.
5 more years? And it's like, are you in a prison working out a
Yes.
sentence? You won't give
So,
yourself parole right now? You want
right.
5 more years of this?
And I'm just pushing back to say I would love it if everyone in this whole wide world would stop thinking along the lines of pain and fear and suffering, and that's what will make me change, or that's what will get me what I want. But we live in a world that that's still the situation, which is why so many people took jabs, Brian.
Right, sure. Well, I'll leave with this thought. I come from a kind of a sports background, and I understand the achievement that sometimes people put achievement on you, and you're trying to earn the love of your parents or the admiration of your teacher or your peers. But in sports, sometimes you just are testing yourself. How fast can I run the 440? Could I go faster next time? Can I hit a home run because the bases are loaded? Can I do this? Okay, the bases are
I
loaded.
would say that's the noble side of all of
I'm
this.
trying to hit a home run. This is a test of me against me,
Mhm.
where I'm going to seek this achievement. And you find this in science too, where people say, but what if we didn't need an electrical motor? What if we could come up with anti-gravity? What if we could come with a friction-free surface? What would that do for space travel or something? And they just try because they're inspired. There's sometimes an internal achievement mechanism, and they'll get pushback, as Brian describes. Their peers are like, you shouldn't try that. Oh, that's not going to work. You're wasting your time.
Yeah.
Who do you think you are that you can just step up there and hit a home run? Well, we're about to find out because I'm going to see if I can hit that home run.
So true. So can I just jump in real quickly? I'm going to ask Maddie a question, or at least pose this concept, and then maybe he can talk about it. But people who are highly sensitive, highly empathic, can sense others' feelings, especially when you're a child and you're sensing your parents, fears and so forth. I'm just wondering about dealing with that because sometimes your courage is and your fears are not necessarily your own. Sometimes they're others, the energy of others that you've absorbed somehow or you're dealing with in some way. So I was just wondering if you would address that because I know that you've dealt with people having that situation.
Yeah. Well, that's a great segue, actually. I can apply that to myself. And I was wondering how I was going to carry on. I don't have quite such a monologue after following that. I think you guys have done a great job. Um, so really, I could just distill it and maybe say it in another way. Because I know for me growing up, regardless of some of the people I've worked with, for me growing up, I grew up in a very aggressive society, 1990s England.
Mhm.
And fear and anger were all around me. And I have these extra perceptory abilities, and it's very hard as a young one to decipher what's yours and what's not yours.
Yeah.
What's because you know um, you are emulating the world at that point, and so you take in information around you as gospel truth. This is the way of things.
Mhm.
And so for me, that fear and being such a gentle young boy and being in such a violent society um, demanded courage, demanded it. It wasn't. It was eat or be eaten, and so
Bible.
this is it. You see, and so I think it's important to understand in any given situation, any topic we can discuss. There's no one size fits all. I mean, the way I like to work is we take a specific situation and we can apply courage to that particular situation. It will be completely different to another situation.
Mhm. Mhm.
Each doesn't fit the same. And for me, I ended up becoming one of those people who had too much courage, much like the thrill seekers, like you described.
Mhm.
Not that I was an adrenaline junkie or anything like that, but it led me to um, counteract the fear that I was feeling with too much courage until courage became a non-choice. So all of these things are choices, but if we adapt something as something that, like, this is my instant reflex reaction, now we're going into a different kind of territory. And so that's something that I developed, where courage for me became a mistake. Because should I poke my nose in that direction? Should I just turn the other way and allow that to happen? Do I really need to respond to that? Or does this warrant an absolute 10 out of 10 aggressive reaction from me right now? You know, but it was pre-programmed, and people can have this pre-programmed in themselves that courage will immediately come to the forefront. And there's no wisdom there. Now, courage itself, and both of you guys, you explained it so perfectly. And Angela, you touched on some very important points. Courage arises from fear. Like you say, they're symbiotic. You know, you can't really develop courage unless you have fear. So what is fear? False evidence appearing real. Stories we tell ourselves about any given situation, or the expectations that we expect a situation to happen. And therefore, we want the situation to happen in a different way, or we are resistant to the expected outcome, even if it seems probable. We don't want to have to go through that. But therefore, we have to have the courage to go through that situation, or to make that change, or to make that choice. But courage within itself is not a guaranteed success. You can have courage all you want, but fail miserably, because courage within itself is just going to make you outspoken. It's just going to make you act. But what's behind those actions? What's behind it? What's driving it? This is what Angela was saying. What's the driving force behind the courage? And that's where the wisdom lies. Now, I would say courage is one of three pillars of virtue. It's the first pillar, courage. And again, Angela touched on these. The second pillar, commitment. So you have courage. The second pillar is to commit to whatever choice you've made. And then the third is discipline. Because if you don't have discipline, then all you're going to have to do is keep remaking these choices over and over and over again in different situations. So you make the choice, you commit to the choice, and you follow through with it. And you make sure that you stick to the path that you've laid out. And that's where courage comes in, because courage isn't a single choice. It's a constant, continuous choice that we have to make, remake, earn, re-earn, learn, relearn, to quote my teacher. It's something that's continuous within us. But it can also become, like I just mentioned, can also become a hindrance. It can become awry. It can become something where you are energetically vomiting over everything. Me. And this is where the ego goes from the fear, which, Angela, you're absolutely correct there. The ego, most people see ego as, oh, I'm better than everybody. Whereas actually most times the ego is saying, I can't do this. I'm not worthy of this. They don't want that. This person doesn't like me. You haven't got the right to do this. That's more the ego's flavor. But, the ego is a very tricky beast, and, it can very quickly adopt and react to any given situation that we decide to better ourselves, right? So I don't really have a really, really long monologue. I mean, welcome to open to discussion.
Well, I'd like to add to that too, is that we think of courage as action, but sometimes courage can be inaction when it's a choice, right? It's a choice to take inaction. So in my household growing up, it was a violent household and abusive household. And I took one way because I'm built a certain way to respond to that. And my sister, one of my sisters, she took another way to respond to that. And she was more fighter. I'm going to fight it. I'm going to speak out. And then, of course, she would get in more trouble. She would get more beatings than the rest of us did. And my action was to just, like retreat, so mine was retreat to live another day kind of thing, don't upset the situation. You're going to get out of the situation eventually, and just don't upset the situation. Don't appease, but get out, just go quietly away. So I think that courage can be, for instance, I think it takes a lot of courage, if you want to use the word courage, because again, that's a charged word. But if you want to say courage, it takes a lot of courage to forgive and release that, right? So I courageously released that. My sister courageously released that. We forgave and released that. And in fact, the perpetrator of the situation was mostly my father, and he is now in a stage of dementia. And guess who's taking care of him? My sister. My sister has stepped up because she
Virtue.
has gone through this forgiveness journey with courage. So she courageously spoke out, and now she courageously forgave, and now she's courageously stepping forward to say, this is the Christian thing to do to take care of this man.
Strength.
And so
Mhm.
I say courage comes in all sorts of forms, and ultimately it's a choice, but it's all about being that conscious. It's about being the observer, not the thought, not those thoughts.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's what I want to impart, is that what we're talking about is trying to struggle within our ego and have conversation, like all these different egoic, um, fearful things we deal with, right? And we're trying to fight fear with fear, I guess is what I'm saying. If you're trying to use your ego to overcome your ego, you're never going to get anywhere. It's just going to be a vicious circle. But being the observer who sees the thoughts, going into that observational level gets you into a higher consciousness state, into more of the soul level. And then you can take courageous action if you
Which
would.
is why courage is so important for self-development, because inaction is also a choice. You know, so many people will not make a choice because lack of courage or fear, whatever, however way you want to put it, they're probably two exactly the same things. But you know, to not make a choice is a choice, the choice of inaction.
Right.
And we have to understand that if we're going to have the courage to make a choice, we could fail. And that has to be already a part of your probability, should
Yeah.
we say.
I used to
There's,
teach women
there's such a
self-defense.
fine line between bravery or um, or courageousness
Mhm.
and recklessness
Yeah,
or
great.
foolishness.
I used to teach women self-defense, and there was a point in the course where we'd say, okay, so you know all the things you can do to avoid the situation, but once you're in the situation, now you know some things to do to defend yourself physically. But there could be a point where you may have to actually make the choice to succumb until you can find a place that you can then get to safety. So you have to be aware that that is a choice you make. And that is courage too. That's a courageous choice too. The whole point of this really ultimately is about control. When you think about it, what what is controlling you? Are you controlling you? Just like you were talking about, Myrna, the inner,
Mhm.
sense of yourself, you're controlling you. Or is it something else externally that you're allowing to control you?
I have a thought, one of the great things I've learned from Maddie's teacher, Andrew Bartlett, is not to step on somebody else's journey. So we talk about these life lessons that we set up for ourselves consciously, unconsciously, and we have to progress through those lessons. If you always rescue the damsel in distress, she may never learn to stop putting herself in distress. She may never learn how to free herself because someone shows up to free her. So she's missing the opportunity for the learning. I think about it as we raise children, that they fall down and then we say, yeah, and we're going to fix your boo-boo, now get back up. They have to learn to get back up. And so sometimes I'll ask myself, yes, I could help this person. Is it mine to do? I have the courage to step in and help them figure it out. Do they need to do it themselves? Is my help that to their net benefit, not just to my own egoic benefit? Hey, I saved the day. Let's think about, what do they need? And maybe they need to learn to find their own courage and step up and sort it out. Maybe they just need a few words of encouragement and then step back and let them figure it out and do it. So I think having discernment, which, Maddie talks about, Brian, you talk about it in terms of spiritual work. Is this mine to do? Is there a place for me in this to be supportive, or should I just move along with what I'm doing because none of this is mine to do? I don't want to step on their journey.
And how does the damsel follow up on her courageous act?
Mm-hmm.
Does she make one courageous act and then feel, well, there, I've done it, and I don't have to do anything more? Does she have the commitment and the discipline to follow through with her actions?
Mm-hmm. As we all
And how do you get someone to do that? That's the longer game, because courage isn't just a choice. Like I said, it's a choice that has to be made and remade, made and remade over and over again.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's take some final thoughts. Brian, do you have some final thoughts? And then how do people get a hold of you?
I'm not really sure what to say as far as final thoughts. I don't know. I would encourage people to start thinking about the overall well-being of society more. I guess as opposed to more of individual preservation, or, I mean, I understand you got to take care of your family, but we also have to preserve society. I think at this point, we have to start thinking about that more based on all the things that have happened in the world. I personally, I feel like it's not good enough to just think, oh, I'll just take care of me and mine. So I don't know, and I do think all the points brought up here are valid. I think there's a lot of valid points, but I also think sometimes when you talk about stuff like the courage of, non-action or inaction, sometimes that's just an excuse. It's like, I don't know if that's always like a genuine thing. I mean, I think that exists in some cases. Like if you look at like Gandhi and like the protests they did, right? They weren't violent, but it was courageous. They stood in front of soldiers being willing to be shot with no weapons themselves. Definitely something like that is courageous, but I think some people might say, oh, I'm not going to do anything. And really it's just because they don't want to step up and do the right thing. But you could justify it as like, well, it's the courage of it, in action or something, So, I mean, but that goes back to looking at your motivations, which you guys mentioned. Yeah, I mean, yeah, like Maddie, you were talking about, being courageous can be reckless. I mean, I agree. You have to have like a kind of all the virtues have to come together. You have to apply some wisdom with your courage. You have to have discernment, mom, like you're bringing up. It kind of all has to come together. Hopefully
Courage
you
is not a
have,
virtue if it's not used with wisdom.
yeah, you got to have like all the virtues coming together to really make it work. Um, if you're being socially courageous, it's good if you still have tact and, respectfulness. You can still get your point across, but, so, yeah, I guess that's all I would mention. Final thoughts to end it with. And yeah, you can find me at alifedesign.org or Special K Coaching on Instagram.
Very good. So Angela, final thoughts, and I don't know if you want people to get a hold of you.
I love that, Brian. And I love the fact that you use the word you would want to encourage people. Think about society as a whole. Thinking of words, and how encourage is in the word encourage. I guess the only final thought I had about this too was, and this is to paraphrase a quote by Mark Twain, but I think courage is really ultimately you acknowledge fear, you feel the fear, and then you do something anyway. Like you said, you do the right thing. But when I was a child, I was fearful and then was in self-preservation. But as I have grown and become conscious and more aware of the observer in my life versus being the thoughts, I can take inaction as an act of courage. So for instance, I mentioned going through, before we started the call, I mentioned going through a divorce back in 2014. And the ex wanted to engage me in all sorts of conflict. And I chose not to engage for the benefit of my own self. I thought also for the benefit of him and also for the benefit of my daughter. And to me, that was an act of courage to not engage in conflict energy with him. And I was doing it in a very conscious way, though everything in me wanted to fight the fire, man, with the fire. So that's what I'm trying to say. That's the point I'm making, is that sometimes the action or the choice you make is one where you may take some inaction to not go into conflict. Like Maddie was saying, where it's just, you might go overboard with it.
Getting your ass handed to you. You might end up getting your actual ass handed to you in many
Right,
different ways.
right. Especially if you can see where it can go. If you are cognizant and aware enough to go, well, if I do this, I'm going to get these kinds of reactions. And so, do I really want the consequences of those actions? Do we really want to escalate that? So those are just kind of my final thoughts. As far as getting a hold of me, I do offer resume reviews and help people with their resumes as a way to make a living. I also support A Life Designed. And so you can find me at alifedesign.org. You can find me at my website, which is mentioned on alifedesign.org. I'm just so thrilled to be here today to talk to you guys.
Oh,
Thanks.
thank you so much. Yeah, we'll make sure those contact information is in the notes below. And Maddie, any final thoughts and how do people get a hold of you? You're on our
So my
website also.
final thoughts would be very grounded. I think that when we think of a word like courage, it brings up acts of grandiose. And it's not to say that it can't be that. If whoever's listening, and if in your own life you have the opportunity to make a grandiose act, then I would encourage you to do it, especially if it has wisdom behind it, and you're just waiting to take that leap of faith. Go ahead and do it. Just don't do it in a destructive way. But I think that for most of us right now, the way the world is, it takes courage just to go day to day to day.
Yes.
And there are many different situations. Just a very brief little story. I remember once, years and years and years ago, there was an old man that lived in the street that I was living at, and he could barely walk. And every single day, he would walk from his house to the shop, buy a newspaper, and walk back again. That walk would take me 30 seconds. It took this man nearly an hour. And I remember looking and thinking, is that weakness or is that strength? And it was strength. He found strength in his weakness every day to get up and do that. And that is courage. And don't feel like to be a courageous being, you have to be ultra dynamic and changing your life at every twist and turn. Sometimes we just need the courage to just follow through and have commitment with the life. And it's the small choices that lead up. And you never know, if you manage to hold your virtue long enough, what life can throw your way. And that's where I'll leave that. I think that we live in a very challenging world right now. And for some of us, it has to be courageous just to live our lives. For others, it's courageous not to be destructive. So make your choice and stick to it, and just make sure it's based in wisdom. And know only action can turn knowledge into wisdom. So I'm not just a talking head. I'm a psychic healer and psychic reader, a shamanic teacher, amongst many other spiritual things. And I'm available exclusively with these guys at the moment.
Lifedesign.org. That's so great. Well,
so if you want to speak to me, I'll have a session.
Yes, well, we can book you. We can refer people to you as we do. We encourage people to have the courage to design their lives. What if you made new decisions and lived more of the life that you want? Some of the negative catalysts of having friends fall away who made different decisions, having the world change so fast, and some people coping better than others with how fast the world is changing. And it seems that's only accelerating. It's not slowing down. So we invite you to join our positive community. We'll put the link below. It's free to do that. And consider designing your life in a way that gives you fulfillment, happiness, challenge, whatever it is you're seeking. I love the spiritual courage that we've all talked about here too, where sometimes getting quiet and going inside and learning who we really are is the first biggest act of courage. So
mistakes are the path to success.
yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you all for joining us. As we talked about courage, visit us at alifedesign.org, and we'll see you all next time.